this video, finally, I want to break down and jump into the startup I've been working on for the last 30 days or so. Just give y'all an idea of some of the steps, the thoughts, the planning, and just some of the things that have gotten here today, where the app is pretty much ready to launch. But again, not going to launch it until like March of next year or spring next year is what I'm thinking. Going back to the idea itself, and the idea for CareerStack, which is what the startup is called, is basically that founders and people who run businesses, or small business owners, entrepreneurs, typically don't have the money or resources or the network to really get technical people on their team. People that need to build websites or anything, build apps for them and maintain stuff, QA, anything. And on the other side, you have tech professionals or aspiring tech professionals who are either trying to learn new skills and stay competitive for the workforce, or people who are like graduating coding boot camps and trying to break into tech and get jobs, but they're always working on projects by themselves. They're doing stuff on Udemy, they're doing YouTube courses, or they're building side projects completely alone. This project is a perfect example of that for me. I'm building this completely by myself. I'm not collaborating with anybody. I'm not using Git with other people. So my repo and the way I do my commits and branches and everything is all just based on me. I don't have to work with somebody else or worry about like my code conflicting and all that stuff. And for people who are going to really work in tech, that's the actual experience. That's actually what it is to build a product with a team. And that's what you're going to be doing at a job more than likely. And that's what people want to hear about. When we're talking about getting employed, getting a job, the thing that people care about the most in tech is your real world experience. Not necessarily that you built this thing off in a silo by yourself and you didn't have to consider the code at all for anybody else. The code base, if it was clean, if it was scalable, can other people use this? Can they read this? Like, you don't have to think about any of that when you're only working by yourself. At the same time, when you work on projects by yourself, you don't get to work on the interpersonal stuff that comes with a job or just the real world at all. A business, a client, if you're even doing your own like consulting stuff, you're still dealing with people when you're dealing with your clients. And so that still takes conflict resolution and communication skills and diplomacy and project management, all those things. So there's no good way, in my opinion, to bring those two things together. People who want to work on their skills and be able to get recognized for it, right? Besides just having your like GitHub repo where you see the little green boxes that show kind of how much you've been pushing. That's great for developers, but a lot of people don't even know what GitHub is or like understand what that chart means. And it still doesn't really speak to your work ethic or like how good you are as a developer or anything like that. So you got Fiverr, you have Upwork, but they both suck, right? Like you can't build a team on either one of those platforms. You're hiring one person. There's no real guarantee the quality of the work is going to be good, even though you're paying them for it. And I've also had a bad experience on Upwork. I've had bad experiences on Upwork and Fiverr. I've had good experiences. I've also had bad experiences, right? And so that's kind of the point. It's very hit or miss on those platforms. And so I wanted to bring all that together into a platform where I felt like it did the things that Fiverr and Upwork probably should have done, or things that just made more sense for people who are trying to actually work on projects. So that is the concept of CareerStack. Obviously, I'm still working on my pitch because that was a little bit long-winded. I don't have like a one-liner completely down yet. But anyways, so that was the idea. And it kind of came out of my previous startup, which was called Who Said, the whole helping teachers and students on group projects. That was my first startup like years ago. So it wasn't like I started completely from scratch. I just realized that need for accountability in a group project or like a collaborative setting was important in more areas than just teachers and schools and school projects. And what I was doing was planning everything out in a Miro board. So if you don't know what Miro is, it's a free tool that kind of acts as like a digital whiteboard, but I love it because it gives you so much flexibility to do anything you want. You can diagram out workflows, you can do like voting for things. If you have other people who need to collaborate with you, you can have multiple people working the same board. Y'all can, put ideas and workflows and brainstorms and pretty much whatever you want. You can manage a project. You can do anything you want inside of Miro, and it's a really great place. I do wireframing in there. I do all my sort of business planning objectives and stuff, and I just lay everything out because I want to get it out of my head. So this whole process of using Miro was about taking all the ideas for like, who are my ideal customer profiles? What are the problems that they have? How do we solve that problem? What's out there in the market? what's our competitive advantage, what are my marketing channels potentially, how do I reach these people, what is the workflow, so what are the steps that each user needs to go through to realize the value in our product that we're trying to give them. And then there's like database design and coming up with that stuff and making sure that you're thinking through all the right things for just MVP. So coming up with the MVP features, coming up with a pricing model. So it changed from what I was planning back then when I was using the Miro board, but and it changed based on conversations with people. So we'll talk about that later. But originally what I had in the Miro board was like a subscription-based, pricing model and whatever. And so you're just thinking about all of the things up front. And I wanted to think about the tools, the services I needed to use, how everything was going to work together. So like my email service provider, my CRM for my customer relationship management software, how am I going to collect emails? How am I going to do the website? Just all the things, architecture. Do I want to do one monolith application? We'll talk about that in a second. Or do I want to like split everything up into like microservices? These are all the things that before I ever started coding that I wanted to figure out and I wanted to have out of my head, and I wanted to have a brain dump or somewhere that I could go back and reference and kind of cross-check my thinking. Because in the early stages, you're probably really excited. You love the idea and you think it's great. But as you like lay everything out and you ask yourself these questions and you create a board or just something you can come back and like visually look at and read through, you'll be able to check over multiple days and with multiple people to make sure that your thinking is like solid and that it still makes sense. So that's all this board was. And then I needed to start wireframing. So I needed to come up with at least an idea of what does this look like and how does it work. And so that was another thing that, took quite a bit of time, was just really thinking through the bare minimum, because I'm not a web developer. So honestly, I used React on this project, but I'm not like an expert at React. But I wanted to think about how can I make the design look decent and like at least what people expect from a web application at the bare minimum, but still make it look as good as I could, obviously. But I had to think about what that looked like, how things were going to work. And so a lot of time spent up front was really just that, deciding on, the business model stuff, the operation stuff, thinking through the architecture, the tech stack, and the wireframes for the MVP and what the MVP features needed to be. So that was like one kind of chunk of work in itself. It was just the upfront planning and just kind of getting all my ducks in a row and getting clear about the idea and what you're going to build. From there, you've got tons of different options on how you're going to build this thing. So custom development is the one that, obviously it is going to take, it can take quite a bit of time depending on what you're building, and it also could add complexity to a lot of things. But the pro of building it yourself is that you have all the flexibility in the world. You don't have any constraints of a third-party software, something they can't do, or have to like pay a monthly fee to upgrade to get features so you can do this thing or whatever. So there's a trade-off if you're not like a really good dev, or if you're not a full stack developer, to getting up to speed and being able to build that thing. But I think that once that heavy lift is behind you, the pros are like so many of building your application from scratch with code. Now, the initial approach that I went with was no code, because I was working my job and I just didn't have the time that I knew I needed to really sit down and develop this application. And part of that, I think, was I didn't feel super confident in my development skills, just because it probably had been about 5 years since I coded, like really worked on the application, until this one. So I knew a lot of what needed to happen, and I felt confident that I could build it, but with my job taking up so much of my time, I just didn't feel like it was going to take me forever with my day job to really have the time after working on the weekends to build this thing. So I think that kind of pushed me towards just keeping it as strictly MVP as I could, and finding a tool or tools I could use to just to test the idea in a way that looked decent for people. And so I went with Flutterflow originally, and I think that was a mistake, because even though you can get stuff done kind of quickly in Flutterflow, I'll say my experience, and I'll probably put some like screenshots or video up here of what it looked like. But my experience just wasn't great with Flutterflow. It takes a lot of time to learn how Flutterflow actually works. And then you're also working within the constraints and limitations of Flutterflow. Unless you already have like a really strong background in Flutterflow, I wouldn't highly recommend it as a way to, really go about like building your first MVP. Now, also, I'm trying to build what I believe is going to be a web-based application, meaning I think most users are going to use it on a laptop or a desktop screen. And the other people who don't will likely use it on mobile as well. But in my mind, the app is kind of prioritized for web, and then it's built for being responsive on the mobile phone. But I didn't go build a native app that you download from the App Store or anything like that, because I don't expect that that's how people are going to really use CareerStack. So for Flutterflow, I feel like if you're building a mobile app that people are going to download from the App Store and things like that, that could be a much better tool or service to use for your MVP. But for me in particular, trying to build a web thing, I just found the web features or the whole user experience of Flutterflow was just not great. And to be honest, it looked like a piece of paper that just kind of had things that you could click on it on the screen. And it wasn't even good. Like the UI, you couldn't really, it didn't really give you any insight into things. There's no like error messages or like success messages, or, hover links weren't really like noticeable. And, all the iconography and buttons were like the same colors. So nothing was really distinguished, nothing stood out. There was no color really on it. And I collaborated with a developer on Upwork or from Upwork on this project when I was doing this on the no code, because I built about 75% of the app in Flutterflow myself. But then when it came down to like the tedious custom aspects of things I needed done, this is why I talk about the trade-off with custom development, because I would have had to take time to figure it out either way. I would have had to figure out how to do it if I did it custom development, but I also would have had to take the time to figure it out in Flutterflow. And so I hired somebody to help me with like that last 25% of the work to get it done. And we got it done, but I wasn't happy with the quality of work. This person was offshore, so they weren't based in America. And, the communication could have been way better. They didn't understand the vision for the product of what I was trying to do. And they also didn't have any UI skills really. So I think that, I spent a few $1,000s to work with this person, and honestly got a very underwhelming product at the end of the day. And when I put that product out to people and users to show them and get initial feedback, a lot of people said like, hey, I like the idea and I get the concept, but I wouldn't use this thing. Like, this doesn't really look good. I consider this a beta, or I would use it if it didn't look like this. So immediately it became clear that even though I had a working tool in Flutterflow that worked, that was going to be a non-starter in terms of going to market. And it also had payments in it, so it was connected to Stripe. So all the things I told you before I didn't have in my very first startup, people couldn't sign up on their own, they couldn't pay me through the app or anything like that. It was all in this Flutterflow application, but the UI was so bad, it was so underwhelming that people didn't want to use it. So I had no choice but to figure something else out. So hence, if you've seen the other videos that I posted recently, I was laid off in June. So I immediately had all this time to like now actually work on this thing. And it didn't happen right away. It took like maybe 2 months. It wasn't until like the 3rd month of being laid off that I even started to work on this. But I already had a game plan. I already did all the upfront kind of like the business planning and like architectural planning of things. And I knew exactly what tech stack I wanted to use. So it's a Rails 7 API. Deployed on Heroku, and then my front end is built in React. It's built and hosted by Vite. If you're in the JavaScript world, like the whole Webpack or Webpacker thing is kind of getting out of date now. So Vite is kind of a new popular build for React, or really JavaScript in general, but I'm using it for React. And so I have that front end deployed on Netlify. And so what's funny about that is that was not initially how I even started building the app. I told you I've been very rusty. I had been off for like 5 years of not really building anything. And React was never my strong suit. I always felt like I needed to learn Redux in order to really be able to like use React. I thought Redux was a part of React, not an optional thing that you could choose to use or not. So every time I tried to use React, I kind of always hit this roadblock with Redux, and then I just kind of stopped using React for all that time. So this project was like the first shot I've had to really get to know React and really use it as a tool and grow to appreciate it without kind of the confusion I used to have around the Redux part of it. So I made the mistake when I first started building that I did a mono repo app. And if you don't know what that means, it's, all your code for front end and back end is all in one repository in GitHub. So I had, I would start, I would run one command and it would start my backend and my front end at the same time. And that sounds great, right? That you can just develop everything in the same repo and all the files are kind of in the same spot, and it makes it easier to kind of just work with everything. But the problem became when I tried to deploy that application to Heroku. It was specifically the Vite build part of React was very, very, very difficult to deploy on Heroku. And I honestly spent like 3 or 4 days just stressing out and just digging through documentation and doing a ton of stuff, just trying to figure out how to deploy the app. And by this point, I think I had like authentication built. I had my nav bar, and I had made a lot of progress to not be able to get this app deployed and use it. So there was a very frustrating 3 or 4 days of just trying to figure that out. The solution ended up being splitting the app into essentially separate repos, or if you want to call them microservices, I don't know if that's considered necessarily microservices, but either way, it's 2 different repos. Now the front end is deployed to Netlify, and it's only the JavaScript React part of everything, and then the back end is deployed on Heroku. That has been literally heaven in terms of deployments and things going smoother. I know now that whenever I'm working on the back end, I'm not worried about one specific change or thing I do on the back end affecting my entire application, or the separation of concerns is just so much cleaner because I'm not great at deployment stuff as it is. So I like my deployments to be as like simple and straightforward as I can, and having both applications deploy separately and having the dependencies of both kind of separate is just so nice. It makes development so much easier, so much better, in my personal opinion. Okay, these are all personal opinions that Darian has. These aren't like industry standard things or whatever. So yeah, that's that. This video is like almost 20 minutes long. I don't know how long it's gonna be when I edit this, but I feel like this needs another part. So I'm gonna cut this one right here, and then I'll make another video getting more into the process of like building this startup solo, what it's been like, and the things I've learned and the steps I've gone through, and just brain dumping on y'all what some of this has been like, so that hopefully some of y'all get inspired to build your own things. And yeah, we just build this community here of people who are just into tech stuff and like building things, and entrepreneurs, and yeah, creatives, all that good stuff. So if you found this helpful, let me know down in the comments below. I love reading the comments, and make sure you like and subscribe. It keeps me super motivated to put this content out for y'all. And I will catch y'all in the next video where we follow up and we keep talking about this one, all right?